Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Afrin Rajai, and in this lecture I'm going to talk about structural family therapy. So structural family therapy was developed by Salvador Minuchin back in the 70s, and it's a very active approach. And the therapists with this approach would be very active in a session, and they really believe that they need to join the family. So that joining part and meeting clients where they are is very important in this approach. It has evidence-based treatments, which is again very important. And in general, if we want to talk about a structural family therapy, we can say like it's a type of family therapy that looks at the structure of a family unit and improves the interactions between family members. This is kind of like this kind of approach suggests that dysfunctional family relationships can create stress and mental health problems for the members of that family. And because of that, by addressing how members of the family relate to one another, the goal could be kind of like to improve communication and relationships so that we can create positive changes for both individual family members and the family as a whole unit. So because of that, some of the concepts that we're going to talk about in the next slides, they are very important in this approach, such as like they talk about boundaries, hierarchy, subsystems, and again, like I'm going to talk about them more in details in a second. But just for now, it's really important to understand how genius kind of like was Salvador Minuchin, because if you want to just compare it, like it's not about good or bad, right? So it's just about understanding. So for example, in Bohemian therapy, like we look at family and interactions in a kind of like multi-generational awareness sequence, right? And then when it comes to structural therapy, we try to have this great and deep observation into the family unit itself. So like the family, the system who is in front of us. And in that way, the structural family therapy is really unique, and I think Salvador Minuchin was really genius because of his own perspective towards family and like developing this method. Structural family therapy, and so it's very obvious that we are going to focus on the structure within each family, and this structure refers to what builds, maintains, and even like destroys individual families. So one of the concepts that we want to talk about is hierarchy of power in this approach. So all families have a hierarchy of power, right? So in healthy systems, they believe that the parents or caregivers hold the authority, right? So they decide what's best for their children, and they work as a united team to kind of like have healthy boundaries. But as we know, this hierarchy isn't the case for all families. In some systems, children seem to run the house. They call the shots, make the rules, right? So I think that is like very familiar these days, especially. And the parents may fall helpless, right, to their demands. In some other families, only one parent has all the power. The other parent may become, obedient, or they can have a different structure. Children may feel, afraid of the powerful parents. The powerful parents may use threats, or even like violence to maintain their role. So whoever holds power makes the decision, and if the power constantly, fluctuates, it leaves family members feeling confused and kind of like unstable. And this is especially true for children. So without any sort of like consistency, they don't understand which rules they need to follow, right? So every day that they wake up, something new might be the case for them. When that's the case for family, children may rebel, or they can kind of like defy their parents if this pattern persists. So that's about hierarchy of power and hierarchy when we are talking about family structure in a structural family therapy. The other concept is subsystems. So family subsystems refer to the specific subgroupings within a family, right? So these groupings happen based on Could be based on gender, age, interest, right? All these different things. But sometimes common subsystems include parental, right? So can include any caregiver taking care of children, or spousal may include a single parent or couple, or siblings includes, any biological or adopted, your step siblings pairs, right? So subsystems can be measured based on the boundaries maintained between, each member. And because of that, the next concept that we have when we are talking about structural family therapy is boundaries. So structural family therapists measure dysfunction based on boundaries and how family members adapt to different stressors, right? So in functional families, family members are flexible and they are kind of like easygoing. They have clear boundaries, but they can adjust these limits as needed, right? So it's not written on a stone. Dysfunctional families, on the other hand, they tend to have very rigid and enmeshed boundaries, right? So those boundaries, they are written on a stone. It doesn't matter if you're sick, if like it's pandemic, if it's like coronavirus everywhere, if we are all isolated in our houses, right? So like boundaries, curfew, all those different things, they are the same. So rigid boundaries are strict and inflexible in dysfunctional families, and in these households, family members, people are expected to follow certain beliefs, or values, or instructions without any question. So there is no communication. These beliefs can include anything from, I don't know, religious affiliation to diet to lifestyle, all these different things, right? So in these families, obviously, as we are talking about them, the whole system rarely support individual thoughts, right? So there is lack of support in these families when we are working with them, and instead of that, members are accepted, by their willingness to conform to, what's going on. So in mesh boundaries, in this situation, in this case that we're talking about, refer to kind of like blurred or non-existent or kind of like loose boundaries, right, between family members. And some of these enmeshed excuse me boundaries may include family members who are taking on the emotion of the other family members, or excuse me, they have no sense of privacy, right? So they tend to present as very close to the outside world, but it can be challenging to kind of like work and have communication because of the close boundary and the enmesh boundaries. So enmeshment can actually lead to struggles with identity or assertiveness in these families when we work with them. So sometimes these boundary issues, they have ongoing ripple effects, right? So for example, a mom who is extremely close to or with her daughter may kind of like withdraw from her husband. If a father favors his oldest son, the younger son may become anxious, depressed, and angry, right? So all those different things that we talked about so far, boundaries, hierarchy, subsystems, they have to do with each other, and they are very important concepts and things that we consider in structural family therapy. What are some goals in a structural family therapy? So obviously the main goals include some of the things that we have been talking about so far, right? So establishing clear boundaries and shifting the hierarchical structure. So a structural family therapist, they really want to improve the separation between couples, children, parents, right? The individuals and subsystems and other family members. They also want to obviously strengthen the subsystems in a family unit, right? So some of the small changes that we're going to talk about in a little bit, how, like with what techniques, they can help with the structure, and they can improve happiness and functioning in a family unit as they believe so. So as family members learn to adapt new boundaries, they can have or gain more respect for one another. Then what does therapeutic relationship look like in a structural family therapy? So as other approaches, therapeutic relationship is very important. They focus on joining and, accommodating for clients. And they have this even like concept that they say make it happen, meaning you need to take whatever to join the family. And by joining the family, we mean that structural family therapists don't assume that they are the experts on the families that they treat, that they work with. So instead of being the expert, they really, their goal is to join the family. And as you may know, this joining requires building rapport and providing validation, having a genuine interest, curiosity, right? And again, like make it happen, by everything that it takes, self of the therapist, and being soft, or having rigid boundaries, whatever it takes to have a good rapport with clients. As structural family therapists, they do that because they want to become a part of the system, right? So they want to learn the rules, hierarchies, the subsystems between the members. So joining happens at the beginning of therapy. However, it's not just a one-time event, right? The therapist in this approach must continue to maintain their position, and they need to stay curious, right? To ask questions and, again, like keep being part of the system. So sometimes they take on the family's style of communication, or manners, and that way they are again like becoming part of the system. If, for example, the family is overly sarcastic, they will make really jokes, right? So this doesn't mean like they are not genuine. It's meant to show respect for how the family acts and behaves. So if you're going to be a structural family therapist, again, like you really need to be very mindful of your tone, your body language, because if you're going to do some of these things just by copying pasting, then it may seem disrespectful, and that is not the intent of a structural family therapist. So in this method, the therapist first spends time observing the family interactions, or how they interact with each other. And then it's not sometimes uncommon for families to present on their best behavior when they first arrive at the office, right? So we all sometimes know that from experience. And this usually happens because of a combination of nerves and people-pleasing tendencies. They may also want to impress the therapist. So in this approach, the family therapists, they are skilled in making careful analysis of human behavior. And they notice all these small things, patterns, behaviors, interactions. And by some of the interventions that I'm going to talk about in a second, they really try again to have a genuine interest and become a part of the family system so they can help them. Interventions that they use in structural family therapy. So the first one is mapping, and in this intervention, family therapists use a structural map or maps to present how family members interact with one another. So they do this task by asking each family member to thoroughly describe the family problems. There's no interrupting or shaming or anything like that, or sarcasm, and then family have full freedom to speak about or to speak what's on their mind. Then the next intervention that they have is reframing. So reframing is a way to provide an alternate perspective, right, to something, to an experience. So with reframing, which is used in different approaches, we try to add dimensions to our perspective, or take different perspectives to a thought or behavior or experience or something that is going on in a family. So for example, a therapist may reframe a father's strict protectiveness over their children as he loves her and he feels concerned about her safety, right? Or they may reframe a child who continues to talk back to their, I don't know, people who are adults, or older than him, or parents or teacher, as like the child wanting to learn how to express themselves, right, and have a voice. So this whole reframing technique and intervention, the aim is creating more solutions for fixed problems, right? So there's a scenario, a story, and we want to look at it from different perspective. It's a way of softening the discomfort, right? So when families, they can believe that each member has good intentions, the system tends to feel safer, right? So as a result, people become less judgmental, self-serving, and again, like that focus on communication, it serves better. So the next technique is enactment, and enactment refers to families engaging and interacting with one another rather than to the therapist directly, right? So again, like we use this technique, with different names in other approaches as well, right? So this exercise, it really helps clients to become more aware of their patterns, right? So it also helps therapists to observe the client, or the clients more closely. Remember, we just said, like, therapists, they try to become a part of the system, and again, with this approach, they have a great chance to observe very well. So enactments actually can help with different insights, such as how, for example, couples relate and interact with another, or children feel, talking to their parents, and how different boundaries or triangles affect relationship satisfaction, right? So the therapist may direct the family to enact a specific conflict, and during this enactment, the therapist can watch how families talk, how they have communication, how they respond, how they react, right? So that is about enactment. Then we have restructuring, and this is like alongside with reframing. Restructuring includes different techniques to disrupt the family's homeostasis, right? So it will include exercises such as setting boundaries, unbalancing, right? So unbalancing is about temporarily taking one person's side, or heightening emotion to kind of like promote change, right? So for example, about heightening emotions, this specific technique about like restructuring helps families recognize the how tense their behaviors could be, right? So, and again, like it's not uncommon for families to run on autopilot for many years. We all, again, like experience that in ourselves, in our families. They may not recognize how much damage they are doing until someone points it out, right? So and again, like remember in structural family therapy, the therapist, that joining process, that rapport is really important. So the therapist has already joined the family, and they are more likely to listen to the therapist's observation. So boundary marking in this restructuring can be about having families identify the limits needed between subsystems, right? So therapists, structural family therapists, will work with families to discuss the appropriate and healthy boundaries to consider for their system, right? And at this point, they have made observations, so which can be very helpful in supporting family members to navigate this, this journey when they are working on in therapeutic session. So it's very important to understand that therapists do not try to solve the family's problem. They encourage family members to take ownership and accountability over making change. And the goal should not be kind of like making them feel like this is whatever like we're talking about is unrealistic. Instead, family therapists, structural family therapists, try to be very realistic and feasible when they work with families and clients. Then the next technique is shaping competence, and shaping competence is about acknowledging and kind of like thinking about positive behaviors. So it's a form of positive reinforcement. The structural family therapist may reinforce a parent who supports their children to follow a specific rule, right? This reinforcement ideally encourages them to continue making that choice. It reinforces that they are capable of doing the right thing, right? So again, like promoting the agency in families. So those are some of the techniques that we use when we work based on a structural family therapy method, and it could be very, very helpful. Again, like when we want to focus on on the whole unit who is in front of us, and helping them with boundaries, hierarchy, and subsystems. Areas that structural family therapists are famous to work with include families affected by trauma, divorce, separation, blended families, which these topics, they make a lot of sense, right? Based on the concepts that we have talked about so far. Intergenerational families, single parent families, when one family member is affected by a mental health condition such as depression, major depression, families affected by chronic illness, and significant life changes such as changing careers, coming out, or moving. These are not the only things that structural family therapists they work with, but these are some of the common ones that they work with. Other lectures, I try to end a lecture with this question about culture and diversity, right? So I leave this question for you to think about. What is the role of culture and diversity in a theory that you just learned or reviewed here? I know that a lot of times when we talk about culture and diversity, about all these different theories, sometimes what I hear is that they did, I don't know, X number of studies, in different population, and the theory was effective. And because of that, they claim that the theory is very well, a very good fit for culture and, diversity and, having that lens in our work. I want you to reflect on that. What do you think about that? And also, when you learn about all these different concepts and theories, of course, that they are very helpful. They are very brilliant ideas, evidence-based a lot of times. There have been many, many studies which show the effectiveness of these theories. And at the same time, I want you to reflect on, so the studies, all these different studies that they have done, they were on which population, right? And when I say which population, I don't mean just nationality. I mean like nationality, ethnicity, diversity, all these social location factors, socioeconomic status, right? And the position that therapists take in a theory, sometimes they say like we are the experts. Sometimes they claim that we are not the expert, but actually in the approach, when you look at all these different concepts and the way that they look and they work with the family, there is sometimes that assumptions there, right? That kind of like we are sure about the definition of a healthy, unhealthy, normal, abnormal. And I want you to challenge yourself on that as a therapist who is, right now it's 2022. So as a therapist who is working in this era and, after this year, that what is your definition of healthy, unhealthy, normal, abnormal? And when you see or when you say that I will meet my clients, my families, people who are in front of me where they are, what do you mean by that actually, right? As a therapist, and how do you want your clients, families in front of you, how do you want they experience themselves in your presence with all these different things that you are doing, techniques, joining therapeutic relationship? How do you want they experience themselves in your presence? And then when you think about that question, see if who you are, first of all, and then what you use, approach, technique, tools, if they are aligned with what you are talking about and what your response is to that questions. If you have any comments, reflection, please feel free to leave a comment here or send me an email. Thank you for watching and listening to this lecture. Stay tuned.